Welcome to the Maryland Defense Force YouTube channel. On today's episode, we are featuring Colonel George Rich, who is the Task Force Commander for Operation Early Light.
Maryland's militia in 1812 had a very substantial role and quite colorful role. Initially, at the Battle of Bladensburg, the militia was not well led and performed rather badly. Then on the flip side, in Baltimore, a vast majority of the defenses, both at North Point and in the city, were militia, because the U.S. military was absent. And there the militia stood quite nicely. Best noted by their performance at the Battle of North Point, particularly in Godley Woods, where General Ross was killed. That was the 5th Maryland, that was virtually all militia. And they defended the city, and they performed beautifully. The British landed at the tip end of North Point, and there were 6,000 British troops. They were tired. They'd marched up to Washington and back. It was very hot, and they'd been on ships for 3 months before that, or several months, coming from Europe. So the Battle of Bladensburg, the burning of Washington, and all the marching from Benedict up to D.C. and then back down really wore them out. They were landed at North Point, and they marched up the Isthmus. The militia, the defenders of Baltimore, led by General Sam Smith, decided to defend North Point at the narrowest point of the neck. That's where the militia first met the British. It was in the afternoon, and General Ross had bragged a few hours before that he'd be having breakfast in Baltimore tomorrow. But in fact, in this skirmish, which was where the British met the militia vedettes, that is the front forces, General Ross was killed, and a number of militia were killed. The militia held very well. They were finally outflanked, and in most part had performed an orderly retreat back towards Baltimore. That impressed the British, but the most significant element is Admiral Cockburn, or Cockburn as we like to say, was with General Ross, and when Ross was killed, it really took the wind out of the British momentum to burn Baltimore. Had the British been successful, they would have burned Baltimore to the ground. They hated Baltimore because so many fortunes were made here from the privateers. Out of the 500 letters of marque issued by Congress, which enabled private citizens to arm ships and raid British merchants, 300 were actually used out of Baltimore. So the British looked at Baltimore as a den of pirates. And Baltimore, the Baltimore waterfront was a very rough place. I mean, if you're going to recruit militia, Baltimore Seaport was a great place to do it because they were tough, hard-scrabble mariners, and they know how to fight. The Maryland Defense Force was actually created in 1917 by the Maryland legislatures, and it's in our part of the Constitution of the legislature. The purpose initially was when, for the first time during the First World War, the 29th Division had been organized, and there was a question because there were a lot of Union and Confederate states involved. Would they fight together in the First World War because of the animosity of their parents and grandparents from the Civil War? But nevertheless, they did, and the 29th Division was called up and sent to France. As a result, the state had no military element to defend the state locally. Thus, the legislature created the Maryland State Guard, is what it was called back then. It's been renamed since then. And it consists of veterans of the military, people who were volunteers, civilians who were trained as learned military skills, and it existed until about 1920, 21, and then it was disbanded when the war was over and the troops came back from France. Then when the Second World War occurred, it was reinstituted in 1940, and during the Second World War, the Maryland Defense Force was up to 5,000 personnel and did all manner of defense work around the state. Defended. At the early part of the war, there was a great fear of saboteurs and sabotage, so they defended arms plants, dams, all kinds of critical sites in the state. And they also had an MP battalion, and they trained pretty extensively through the war. Interestingly, people would join the Defense Force to get some idea of military training, and then be drafted and go into the armed services. So we had a lot of turnover in World War II, but it was a pretty effective organization. And then again, after the Second World War ended, the Defense Force ceased to exist. And it was reinstituted in the mid-'80s, and has been in existence ever since. The mission has changed. Again, we're all volunteer. We have no compensation. Our ranks consist about half retired military and half civilians who want to serve, don't have the ability or the wherewithal to devote multi years of their time to the Army, Navy, or the National Guard's almost full time now as part of the Army. So they want to serve, they want to be useful, but they just don't have the times. In some cases, they don't pass the physicals, or they have other jobs, so they volunteer with us. We have, under General Lucas's command, in the early 2003 and 4, we've gone from sort of an armed adjunct to the National Guard to really we perform services the Guard just can't do on their own, and because of budget constraints. And I'll elaborate for a second. We have, just to give you an example, we do all the chaplain, or almost all the chaplain work for the National Guard. We have a 50-person JAG Corps, and we handle an enormous number of legal issues for the Guardsmen. Guardsmen and women wind up in all kinds of situations with divorce, death, family law matters, you name it. And so our lawyers will do work for them pro bono. If you look at the history of 1814, people stepped up from every walk of life and volunteered many without pay, without compensation, to defend the city. Our work here is going to be limited to Fort McHenry. Our 10th Medical will provide doctors and EMTs throughout the event, and then we're also going to have some information and recruiting stations here. And more important, or as important, we have, and I should have mentioned earlier, we have a really phenomenal band. And we're going to play at both ends of the march on Thursday, September 11th, when the 1st Battalion of the 175th is going to march 6 miles from Patterson Park up to North Point. And our band is going to play at both ends of that activity. And we've helped coordinate a lot of other activities here at the fort in Baltimore. So we have a role, and we're looking forward to it. This is really significant for Baltimore. The Star-Spangled Banner was written 3 miles east of here. The flag this banner itself, as I understand, it's the most visited item at the Smithsonian. We had them together for the first time in June, displayed together in the same place, never done before. And I think it's a huge event for Baltimore, and the importance of the Star-Spangled, our national anthem, being written here and defending our country, particularly where it was done totally out of the citizenry. I mean, not to cut the federal government, but the defense of Baltimore was organized and executed by well-trained military leaders who led average citizens and did it quite effectively. And then they, by and large, stood up pretty darn well. And that in 3 weeks, every walk of life, every race, gender, coalesced into a defensive force that actually saved the city, and who knows, may have saved the country.